So hello and welcome to Updating Your Emergency Plans from Pandemics to Acts of Violence to Extreme Weather. My name is Shira Megerman and I am moderating this panel. I am a Senior Legal Information Librarian at Boston University School of Law. Before we get started, I want to thank Marcelo Rodriguez, Research and Training Librarian for the U.S. Courts, for the Second Circuit, for the idea of this panel and putting it together. And if you learn from what you hear today and you like what you hear, please thank Marcelo and the panelists. And if you do not, you can blame me. Our panelists today are Anna Russell from the Alaska Branch Librarian, U.S. Courts for the Ninth Circuit, Heather Kushnerick, Special Collections Librarian and College Archivist, South Texas College of Law, Houston, and Lacy Rakestraw, Director of Law Library, St. Louis County. The panelists will be answering questions, but we are taking them at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to enter them throughout the presentation. COVID-19 was the ultimate unplanned disaster. How have you each responded to the pandemic? And Anna, we will start with you.
Thank you, Shira. So in response to this question, I was thinking about what we're all going through, and I think my quick response is that I'm embracing change right now, and I'm kind of expecting to embrace it for a long time to come. As part of a larger unit of libraries that spans many states, we are seeing the need for a varied response to the pandemic, which makes meeting work needs in multiple environments crucial. We are concerned about and have developed practices and procedures for employee safety, their personal needs, and the changing research needs of patrons, as well as material handling changes. So that's sort of what's going on with that for us.
Thank you. Heather, how have you been addressing it?
So nothing about COVID-19 has been wonderful, obviously, but the timing of events in Houston was actually quite fortuitous for us based on when community spread began and the timing of our spring break. We actually have an infectious disease section to our disaster plan. So our safety and security office had been monitoring the spread of COVID for some time. Our emergency management operations team had started meeting in late February. We already had Zoom set up. The faculty had started using it in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. And at the beginning of March, everyone got an account. We all had refresher courses, and IT started ordering things like laptops and webcams and headsets, and then just gave them to whoever needed them to be able to work from home. Our dean wanted all of us to be able to work from home, and he started telling us in early March that, maybe at the end of the day, just make sure that you have everything with you to not come back to work tomorrow. So we started doing that. And when community spread was officially reported in Houston, it was reported at a news conference on Wednesday, March 11th. And that day, our dean sent out an email and said, effective immediately, there will be no more classes on campus. Classes will resume online tomorrow, Thursday, March 12th. So our students didn't miss any classes whatsoever. Our spring break was the very next week, starting on March 16th, and the faculty as a whole canceled their plans, and they spent the entire week making sure that all of their courses worked for online, practicing using Zoom, using each other as their students, using their faculty, their family members as students, and they just figured out how to fully utilize the Zoom platform for classes. And in the library, we spent that whole week getting ready for online support. We got our LibGuide up. So when the stay-at-home order was officially issued on March 24th, we were good, we were great. But I should probably mention that we were able to do all of this so quickly because we're a private law school. Our dean is the dean of the law school, he is the president of the school, and he is the head of the board of directors. So we don't have any red tape that he had to go through. He worked with the emergency operations team, and once they decided on a course of action, they could just do it. It was handled well, and I think we were really lucky.
Lacy, please.
As the courthouse, we didn't have the benefit of being able to shut down like a lot of places did because we're essential and we're the busiest courthouse in the state of Missouri. We couldn't stop. That said, we told staff, just grab your equipment and go home, work from home, set up at home, and then we will figure things out as we go. And we've been doing that since March. The department heads, we've all been meeting either on Zoom or sometimes we come in person, Our director of judicial administration likes to talk about the movie Apollo 13, dumping everything on the table and build the ship as we go. And that's essentially what we've been doing, kind of making it up as we go, saying, well, these are the constitutional things we have to do. These things can't change. But is there any law that says we can't do it virtually? Is there anything that says we can't do it this way? We've also been fortunate that we've gotten a lot of guidance from the Missouri Supreme Court to give us a little bit of backing so that we would do things, and then we would talk to the Supreme Court and they would say, that's a good idea, let's put that out statewide. So that's been helpful. That said, as soon as the stay-at-home order went into effect, I closed the law library to the public so that I could focus more on the court as a whole as a judicial administrator. I haven't really been much of a librarian since March, and I miss it quite a bit, but I feel like my contribution to the court as a whole has expanded.
Great, thank you. So moving on, what was your disaster and how did your disaster plan help prepare you for it? So Anna, we will start with you.
Okay, thanks. So I really like that metaphor, Lacy, of the Apollo 13 dumping everything out on the table. There are definitely there are definitely some parallels here with other unexpected disasters. So my goal for my portion of the presentation is to try to explain, describe what it felt like to be in a truly unexpected major disaster, and that was the November 30th, 2018 earthquake in Anchorage. So as you can imagine, our November 2018 earthquake made local, state, and national news. It's very difficult to explain what a magnitude 7.0 earthquake feels like, but I am going to try. As we all provide ideas, tips, and tools for your disaster and emergency plans, I am hoping to highlight the ironic but doable concept of planning for the unplanned for event. As a mental image here, I don't know if this is too out of date, but some of you may have seen the I Love Lucy show where Lucy is pregnant and needs to go to the hospital. She and Ricky have their plan, but as soon as the moment to go to the hospital strikes, panic ensues. So being in an earthquake is even more panic inspiring as you had no way of even trying to plan or know when the next earthquake is coming. So I think the first concept to discuss is the variety of human responses to deal with in a truly unexpected emergency. We took a photo of one of our clocks that stopped at time 0 for the earthquake. This is the moment when the emotional, physical, and psychological responses are all starting to explode for everyone in unique ways. I broke up the way in which the time from the immediate moment of the disaster event affected how we handled our experiences. Our responses at physical, emotional, and psychological levels were different at different points in the emergency. What we needed to accomplish and focus on changed as time passed. So to set the stage, the November 2018 earthquake happened early in the morning. We were in the midst of the holiday celebrations period at work. It was cold and dark out at this time of year in Alaska. In Anchorage, it doesn't get sunny until about 10 a.m. in the morning at this time of year. Your natural environment will always be something to consider. Disasters, they seem to always strike at the most inopportune times. A number of my coworkers, including myself, were having a holiday breakfast get together when everything began shaking and then rolling and then the lights went out. You could hear the sound waves of the earthquake, and I remember thinking it sounded like a train. Tiles came down from the ceiling and the power went out. Furniture and fixtures fell across office hallways and the dust went flying. We all knew an earthquake had happened, but we didn't know the extent of the damage. I remember my immediate physical response walking back to my office. I was shaking. And I was kind of surprised that I was shaking. I was like, what's happening? In the next slide, I have a 1-minute video that helps make the earthquake, the initial few minutes, come to life. This was created, it was pretty cool. It was created by the U.S. Marshals in my courthouse building. pay close attention to see the windows break and the floor roll and break, the like floor carpet tilings break and the ceiling tiles fall. We were not certain how well the sound is going to come across through Zoom. So here's a warning that you may need to adjust your computer speaker volume, and advanced apologies if it's either too loud or too soft for you. Thanks, Shira. So I think, I mean, the sound, obviously, it wasn't quite like as dramatically sound scored as that, but that helped with like the intensity. So you were watching the video sort of through two platforms to see it, but the display cases were really shaking. The floor, like you kind of caught it maybe, but it was rolling. Like it was just, it's very hard to explain how like big and monstrous the event was. These are some images of the surrounding roads near my work in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. So now we are a little out from time zero for the event. Everyone will check in with immediate coworkers, but then the next concern is family, especially children and elderly family members. Work sites around the city become unsafe to remain inside. And remember that we have winter temperatures outside, so that too is a concern for everyone. People were leaving work offices without their coats or anything. 100% of people around the community in the impact area begin to use their cell phones. And this is something you can bet on will happen in any city with any of these major disasters. The importance of communications and knowing your current and changing information about the disaster situation just cannot be overstated. Not knowing is one of the hardest things, and having a communication protocols for your staff is really going to help in lessening this big area of concerns, especially in the beginning. I was lucky to have one of my kiddos in a daycare near my work environment, so I went over there, and then it took a little bit of time for my partner to pick us up. And then we had to go pick up my other child from elementary school. And as we were waiting in traffic, we were surprised to see extremely long lines at gas station. This happened pretty soon in time from the earthquake, maybe a couple of hours out. We also saw runs at supermarkets happen in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. Also that day, there were really long lines at drive-through food stops. Traffic was the worst it's ever been, ever, because there was power out across the city. So it took about 2.5 hours to travel a distance that normally would take 35 minutes. People were really panicking in large and small ways. Here's just a reminder that it's really worth your time to investigate what may have come before for the individuals affected by your emergency event. Did they live through a similarly devastating hurricane, tornado, or wildfire, or some other terrible disaster? Were people killed in the prior event? Knowing what a 7.0 earthquake is like, I would never ever want to experience an earthquake of 2 magnitude levels higher, like the earthquake that hit the same area, this Anchorage in 1964. A 9.2 magnitude earthquake is truly incomprehensible to me, but it is worth taking a moment if you have coworkers who may need some extra support for having to deal with emotions from prior experiences as well as the current crisis. We had a lot of people who had also lived through the 1964 earthquake. This is when the information starts to flow, at least in the earthquake scenario. The extent of the damage and recovery plans begin developing. These photos were a small example of every shop, library, office, store with loose items on shelves. We had a lot of cleanup to do across the city, and that too can be emotionally draining. Here are a couple images of my library after it was about half cleaned. I found that the extra heavy law books that I have did not rattle off the shelves as easily as paperbacks will. We did have cracks along every wall. All photos were down, paintings. We were concerned about possible asbestos releases in building interior spaces. We had a lot of physical damage to deal with. Our disaster plan did not include many specifics about earthquakes. The most useful parts in the plan were parts of the communication protocols and employee safety suggestions, which turned out to be the most helpful. During the cleanup phase, my best praise for myself was that my library had a number of books from the statutes at large volumes. These are pretty thick books, and they're heavy, and they were above the normal shelves. And there had been some shelf maintenance work that had been put off. I had taken the time to move all of those books, though, so that they were housed neatly within their proper shelves. It had occurred to me in a non-emergency period of normal operations that those books placed above the shelves were a hazard. And so I was happy that I had taken the time to address that issue before disaster struck. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Heather Kushnerick.
Okay, thank you. So, Hurricane Harvey was the disaster that I'm going to talk about. And when it hit in late August 2017, our semester had just started. We were actually in the process of revamping our entire institutional emergency plan. I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but frequently when disasters hit, you're kind of in the middle of doing something, planning anyway, and so it can be helpful. For the school, our first overall draft was done, and the library had already submitted the final draft of our portion. I mean, we're a library, so we already had a plan in place. We just had to rework it a little bit in order to fit it in with the wider institutional emergency operations plan. And that is a very important point to make, which is that your institution needs to know where you fit within the bigger picture. Our director is on the emergency management team in charge of the building, so through her, the library is always kept in the loop of school operations, and the school always keeps the library in mind. Now, being on the Gulf Coast, we are primarily concerned with storm damage, but the nice thing about hurricanes is that we get advanced warning when they're coming. So we have time to go through and secure collections, equipment, and the buildings. And for a while, Harvey didn't look like he was going to do much of anything. And so you can skim down this and you can see the timeline of the Harvey warnings and see that we really did have quite a bit of time before we knew that he was coming. We had time to prepare for Harvey coming here. A lot of people in Houston, I think, weren't so worried about Harvey. And when we talk about hurricanes, what you're concerned with usually is the storm surge. And since we knew that Harvey wasn't going to hit Galveston, we weren't concerned about a storm surge. But we do have a preparation checklist that we go through in our plan. When we knew definitely that it was going to hit Texas and that Houston was going to be impacted in some way, we went through the list and we secured our patio equipment, and the property services guys came in and they hooked up portable AC units in the special collections and in the reading room, so that in the event that the power did go out, those units are connected to our emergency power system, so that would kick on and the temperature and humidity levels would be maintained, which is a great thing. That means that while I'm stuck at home dealing with rain and whatever, I don't have to worry about what's going on in the special collections. I know that everything there is fine. So our campus was closed at noon on Friday, August 25th. Now, Harvey made landfall that night close to Rockport, Texas, which is 200 miles away from Houston. It's actually a little over 200 miles away from Houston. And it did hit as a Category 4 hurricane. But to give you an idea of how big a storm Harvey was, it started to rain in Houston that night. I actually lost power that night, and I thought that the storm was moving much faster than it actually was. That's how big of a hurricane it was. But then he was downgraded, and by the time it got to us during the overnight of Saturday, August 26th and into Sunday, the 27th, this is when the flooding started. And this picture on the left is one of my favorite pictures from Harvey because it gives you an exact timestamp of, wow, that was a lot of water. So in less than 48 hours, you couldn't drive in Houston. There was so much rain that we were all kind of amazed by it. Part of that is because Harvey came to Houston, and then like a lot of storms, he just stuck around. This is something that has happened several times in Houston. It happened in 2001 with Tropical Storm Allison, Harvey, and then just this past year with Tropical Storm Imelda. Now, Harvey dropped 51 inches of rain on the Houston metro area. That's 60 inches of rainfall that it hit, I think was somewhere in Wharton or Wharton County, so not the Houston metro area proper, but 51 inches of rain in 4 days is a lot of water, and it's impossible to drain that amount. I was really lucky. I live on the northeast portion of the metro area, up in the Humble, Atascocita, Kingwood area. We only got 35 inches of rain. My neighborhood was an island, but none of the houses in my immediate area flooded. This was not the case with nearby areas. Humble and Kingwood both flooded. That's the San Jacinto River overflowed its banks and completely destroyed a lot of homes and businesses. The flooding was equally bad on the other side of the Houston area. And that's because a lot of the flooding in this area was due to the Corps of Engineers releasing water from either Lake Conroe or area reservoirs. And they did that because, well, they did that to prevent even more catastrophic flooding. So some areas were intentionally flooded. And on the right here, you can see some people trying to clean up their house. My campus was closed for a week while we waited for the city to drain. We closed on the 25th, and the campus sort of kind of a little bit reopened to staff on the next Thursday. And we had several professors, staff, and students whose homes flooded, and they did have to evacuate. And then, of course, once they can get back to their homes, they had to rip out drywall. They lost their furniture, they lost their clothes, they lost a lot of their coursework, they lost their computers. There was a lot of cleanup that had to be done. In the library, one of our core operations staff members, her house flooded, and they had to evacuate first to a shelter, then to a hotel. And they actually ended up staying at a friend's beach house until they got their house livable again, which sounds really funny, but because of the way the storm went over land, Galveston didn't flood. It rained there, but nothing flooded. So they stayed on a house on Galveston while their house in Dickinson was draining and they were ripping out the walls. When I say they stayed there until they got their house livable again, if you've seen any of the pictures, a lot of people moved back into their homes without walls and without floors. So they ripped up all the flooring, they ripped out all of the walls and all the insulation, and they stayed in their house until they could get it fixed. But it took a very long time. For them, it took almost a full year to have their house completely fixed up. Apparently their dog really liked it because he could just walk through the walls and he didn't have to, go around to doors. So they thought it was hilarious. The dog would just go to different rooms, go walking through walls. Now, Harvey is when we first started using Zoom because we had impacted students and faculty. They would attend classes virtually. Faculty would record their courses because students couldn't always attend on time. And it really took about 3 weeks for the Houston area to actually drain completely. And so it took a very long time for supply trucks to get into the city, for construction materials to get into the city. And there was so much damage that it took a lot of time to get houses rebuilt. And so for a very long time, we just kind of had to do with what we had. So our plan really did work. It worked very well. There are a few things that we realized we needed that we didn't have. I'm going to talk about that in the next part of our discussion. So Lacy, take it away.
Well, I'm going to talk to you all today about active shooters. And I'm going to take you all back about 30 years ago. So before COVID, even before Y2K. On May 5th, 1992, a man named Kenneth Baumrick entered St. Louis County Circuit Courthouse for his divorce hearing. And at that time, you could just walk through the front door. He was carrying a briefcase with him, with his attorney. There weren't any metal detectors. There was some security, but not much, early 90s. And he walked to his courtroom with his attorney and sat down at counsel's desk. And during the middle of the proceedings, he opened his briefcase, which contained 2 pistols. He used one of them to shoot his estranged wife, Mary, in the head, killing her. He shot his own attorney and Mary's attorney. They both survived. He shot at the judge. He shot and hit the bailiff. He shot one of the prosecutors that just happened to be there, and he shot 3 police officers. They all survived. He then went on a running tour of the courthouse. At the time, there weren't locked doors to get back into the chambers area. You could just open the door and go. And he went back there looking for judges and looking for anybody that looked like an attorney. And he shot at them. Ultimately, he was brought down by police shots, 9 shots fired. 2 of them shot him in the head. He survived. This is his mugshot. He was tried in the same courthouse that he went on his rampage, and he was sentenced to death in 2001. Well, clearly he appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court, and they granted him a new trial because that's obvious bias to be tried for a courthouse rampage in the courthouse where the rampage happened. That said, his second trial that happened in St. Charles County, which is right next to St. Louis County, they also found him guilty and sentenced him to death. He appealed many times since then, and the appeal was upheld. However, he never did face lethal injection. Instead, he died in prison in 2015 of natural causes. And while that seems fairly recent, and 1992 seems so long ago, it's still having an impact on my courthouse. Interestingly, we didn't have a plan in 1992 for this. There had been talk about security and safety at the courthouse and concerns. And ironically, while the rampage was happening, on the same floor, just down the hall, a special committee of judges and prosecutors and public defenders and security were meeting to discuss courthouse security, and perhaps we should do something about that. Again, ironic that that was happening at the exact same time this was happening. So what does that mean for the library? Well, my library just happens to be located in the same building as the courthouse. So sink or swim, we're all going down together. The library's policies are the same as the court policies and vice versa. So we all have to work together as an institution. So to that, I suggest if you're worried about your institution's safety, you need to speak up now before it's too late. You need to get involved with the planning of any policy that affects your library safety. And it doesn't hurt to get to know and make friends with the people that are protecting you. Get to know your security guards, have them routinely make visits to the library, have a presence known before this becomes a problem. Advocate for active shooter training. It's something that you hope that you never have to use, but like my other co-presenter said, in the moment of panic, you're just going to grab your cell phone and try to call people. You're not going to remember the run, the hide, the fight training. So the more that you get that, the more that is ingrained, it's just second nature.
Thank you. I think, Lacy, you just touched on a really good point, which is, being proactive instead of reactive, which as much as we can have the best laid plans, can't cover everything. So how did you all change your plans since your disaster, and how is the disaster still affecting your library? We'll go to Anna.
So I was really glad to be a part of this panel. I don't think you can do proper disaster planning without access to concrete emergency and disaster events to connect your plan to. I think my biggest takeaway for disaster plans is making room for the human element. A lot of plans can get very rote and very sort of, robotic even. And so along with the recovery and material repair procedures and the communication protocols and the damage assessment techniques and the continuity planning, I think taking time to keep in step with how people are coping is a very valuable part of the overall plan to lead you to a complete rebuild and to get back to quote unquote normal. One of the things I did was ask for staff to share notes for posterity. and I've taken a couple screenshots of them. We also took an archive to save all the sort of news and videos and things that we could surrounding the event. So I got permission to share from the folks who sent me these notes. So one of them said she did fine, but the puppy wouldn't come out from under the desk for hours though, or the deck. We weathered it all okay, better than many. It was frightening to see how much was damaged and destroyed. Houses close to mine have been condemned. We didn't have water stockpiled. Food, yes, plenty. Water, medicines, pet food are what we didn't have much of on hand. Be prepared, have a plan, and wear a heavy coat in the winter in case you get stuck outside. I was thankful it happened when I was around colleagues. They kept me calm. All I could think about was my kids. Luckily, they were fine. The house was a mess, cracks on the walls, some broken glassware and TV, but nothing that we can't replace. I'm just glad everyone was okay. And she wrote some really funny hashtags about what everyone was thinking throughout that period. I was thankful that the person who sat at my desk before me kept flashlights in the desk. In the future, I plan to keep a proper emergency go bag at the ready, including, for example, winter gloves. So these were a couple of many really valuable, helpful notes about the different experiences that staff were having at the exact same time and the really helpful input that everybody can provide. That was really helpful in updating disaster planning and working through a major event. So that's kind of my takeaway. So that's what I've got, Shira.
Thank you. Heather?
One of the great things about having a disaster happen right in the middle of your updating a plan is that people start turning in their stuff. Whenever you do like a really big company institution-wide project like this, where every department needs to have their procedures turned in so that you can be a full and complete plan, there's always those people that have to be reminded, deadline's coming up, you got to turn this in. And Hurricane Harvey really helped remind them of the importance of that. So we finished our plan, and that was wonderful. Now, for the plan itself, these are some of the resources that my institution uses. Badri talked about before the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. My institution uses this, and for our pandemic appendix, it is based on the CDC's Pandemic 2017 update. So if you are still working on your pandemic portion, I highly recommend that you go and you look at this. This is what we based ours on. Now, what we realized afterwards was that while the plan was in place and we had a great communication system set up, we didn't have all of the information that we needed. We needed some vendor contact information that was on campus in paper files. We have, access to our emails off campus, but if it's not somebody that you email on a regular basis or a vendor that you don't contact regularly, you might not have that information stored. So when we got back into the library after Harvey, we started having meetings about what we needed to improve our system so that the next time something like this happens, because we live in Houston, there will be a next time, we have all of the information that we need. So we started adding all of our vendor contact information into Shira, which is our ILS system, because if it's in there, even if we don't have VPN access to our desktop computers, or if the power's out so we can't access them through VPN, we can use Sierra Web and we can get the information that way. We needed to have that information so that we could get our students and professors replacement books when they needed it. So we implemented a password management system, and all of our passwords to accounts that we access regularly, we can all access it, so that if one of our colleagues needs to take care of a flooded house or a family member with COVID, then they don't have to worry about what they should be doing. We have that contact information and we can take it. We can do the work for them so they can focus on taking care of themselves and their families. Unfortunately for us, water events like Harvey keep happening. In the last 5 years, we've had 3 500-year floods and 2 1,000-year floods, which sounds really big and scary, but it just means that there's either a 1 in 500 chance or a 1 in 1,000 chance of a rain event like that happening. We've had 5 of them. So the last one was Tropical Storm Imelda, which was last September. Unlike Harvey, we didn't have a lot of notice with Imelda, which means that, you know, our disaster plan kind of couldn't work as it was laid out to. So we all knew that it was going to rain. They told us there was a storm, it's coming, it's going to rain. Okay, but Imelda was only named 4 hours before it hit land, which means it evolved rapidly overnight. So I woke up the morning of September 19th to find out that my kids' school district had closed. My campus was still open, but my kids weren't going to school, so I wasn't going to work. I live 25 miles from downtown Houston. I live in another town. I live in another district. And in our region, in the Houston metro area, it's not uncommon for one suburb to have torrential rain while another one that's on the other side of downtown barely gets a drizzle. I mean, it's not uncommon at all for that. So it's really hard to judge how bad a storm is going to be. And in the case of Imelda, by the time the weather folks on TV started telling everybody that, you know, maybe stay home if you don't have to leave, people had already gone to work. So by noon that day, South Texas decided, you know, something, it's terrible out there, we need to close. But like Bill said earlier, there's a problem with that sometimes in that our metro system had shut down. So people would go to the park and ride in their suburb, they'd park their car, they'd jump on a bus, the bus would take them to downtown, and that whole system shut down. So people were downtown and they were stranded there. They couldn't get home because the buses weren't running because the highways were flooded. Imelda did drop 44 inches of water, and most of that was in the first 12 hours, and that started in the middle of the night. So by the afternoon of the 19th, the rain did start tapering off a little bit. The area that I live in, up in the Kingwood area, got close to 3 feet of rain. Downtown got 11 inches. That's a huge disparity when you're talking about standing water. Anyone who lived close to downtown could probably get home, but for those people that were stranded downtown because they needed to get out to Katy or they needed to get up to Humble, they needed to go down to Dickinson, they were stuck there. So your disaster plan in a case like that is everybody stays on campus until it's safe to leave. Nobody had to spend the night. I think everybody finally managed to leave and get home. I think the last person left at 8 o'clock that night. But there were people, like one of our work study students lives out in Katy, and 3 other students heard her talking and they were like, you live in Katy and you have a car here? Well, I live in Katy and I left my car at the parking right there. Can I get a ride with you? So she made new friends. They got in the car, she drove, and everybody in the car was on their phone, on their traffic app saying, okay, there's high water on this road, so you need to go this way. And it took them hours, but they navigated around all of the high water and they all got home safe. You know, these events aren't going away. If anything, they're happening more frequently. And so you have to have these plans in place and you have to learn from every disaster. You have to update your plan every disaster. And honest to God, the way this year has gone, you know, hurricane season gets really bad for us here in August and September. And I'm kind of terrified. I don't know what's coming next. And I really, really hope it isn't as terrible as the rest of this year has been, but you know, who knows? Lacy.
We're hoping the same for you, Heather. Same with you. Lacy.
Well, 1992 doesn't seem like a really long time ago for a lot of people. We still have some people in our courthouse that still work there and worked there in 92. And if you know anything about government, change is very, very, very slow. But fortunately, a lot has changed in the courthouse since that day. So now at our courthouse front entrance, we have metal detectors and we have x-rays and we have armed guards. When people come visit the courthouse for the first time, I tell them, think airport security. That's how strong it is. Our security is probably stronger than even at the Supreme Courts. That's how seriously we take it now. There have been requests from attorneys to have exemptions through passing through, but honestly, a lot of them have been caught with weapons in their belongings. So they don't have an exemption. The only people that are exempt, if they want to be, are judges and court execs like me, but you have to pass a strenuous background check. And honestly, even right now with COVID, nobody is exempt. Even the judges have to go through security and have their temperature taken, and they might not like it, and I can tell you they don't. Everybody has to get checked. And something else that's changed, in this picture right here, on the bottom right, that's one of our chambers benches in the courtroom. And if you look at the bottom, see that big long section there? That's, and then the one right behind it, those are actually reinforced bulletproof layers. So that if there is another shooting, God forbid, if the judge can't escape in one of those doors to either one of their sides, they can hide behind that bench. Of course, it's not been tested, and none of them say that they want to be the guinea pig, and they'd rather not test it, and they'd rather just flee out the doors. It's there in case they need it. All of our 40 some odd courtrooms have been retrofitted with that. In that picture to the left there, that's a picture of me in my office with one of our bomb dogs. Aside from the regular patrol dogs and drug dogs that are in our building, we do now have bomb dogs. And they're not just sniffing packages, they can sniff gunshot residue on people's hands. They're very, very sensitive. And anybody that knows me knows that I love dogs. I've never met a dog that I don't like. So clearly I made good friends with their handlers. So when they need a break and they want to go off leash, sometimes they'll bring them into my office and I'll get to play with them and love on them. But it's nice whenever there is an unattended parcel. Like if somebody leaves a package in the library, I can call down to security and have them come up and have them sniff it, and I know that it's safe. It deters people from leaving things sitting around the courthouse. We also clearly have regular active shooter training. And it's not just the, hey, sit down, watch this video that talks about the run, hide, fight that everybody knows. We actually have security consultants come in and speak to us to answer some questions. They keep it really, I guess, as lively as you can for active shooter training, but they keep it pretty short. It's effective. So if you don't have anything like that at your institution, I really push for it because, like I said earlier, it's better to have a plan now and to practice now. All of this is to say, the library benefits from this too, because not only do I get to pet the bomb dogs, and not only does my staff get to participate in the active shooter training, we also have panic alarms. Throughout the entire building, we have panic alarms. You'll see my desk behind my head there. I have one connected to my desk. There's one in the library itself. And now everywhere has cameras. It's hard to find a place in that courthouse that you're not going to be on camera, which is a good thing because we regularly have to review security footage for various things. Somebody in the Q&A asked about this, and I was going to talk about it. My very first thing that I did, my first month on the job, I instituted what I called a hostile patron policy. And that's because before I was at the court library, I was the evening librarian in East St. Louis, solo. And if you know anything about East St. Louis, it's not known for its safety, especially at night. And so we had a lot of hostile patrons. So I got very good at talking people down and calming people down. So I talked to my staff when I made this policy, and we have a code phrase, something really innocuous. This is not my code phrase. It would be something like, hey, Lacy, do you know where the stapler is? And that to me is our phrase that I know that I need to come out and intervene and try to de-escalate the situation. And while I'm talking to this person, if I can't get them to calm down, I'll make a hand gesture to my staff and they'll push the panic button so that while I'm de-escalating, we can have security come in and handle things. It's worked really, really well. Our library is one of the only places in the courthouse where members of the public can just walk up and if they wanted to poke you on the nose, they could. Everywhere else is behind locked doors or behind screens or whatnot, but our library is open to the public. We need to be open to the public too. So because of that, I instituted that policy and it has worked really well so far. And as the question in the chat asked, yeah, we do get a lot of people with mental health issues. And sometimes you cannot talk those people down. And sometimes you do just have to have them escorted from the building by security. That's why the relationship I've made with my security officers has worked wonders. They know that if I'm calling them up there, it's bad. If I can't talk someone down and I can't handle things myself in that library, it's bad. And they're there like that. Despite us being 6 floors away, it's bad. That said, they also routinely visit us. They walk through the courthouse and they come up all the way to the 6th floor to the library. Because we're friendly, they come and chatter with us, but more so, their presence, just their mere presence is a great deterrent from anything. Because I've noticed that people see them walk in, they see them talking to us, and then they watch them leave. And I don't know that that's stopped anybody from doing anything, but it certainly makes me feel better that people know that our security is constantly around and can be right outside that door.
Thank you. Before we move on from that, Heather or Anna, do you have any response to, because we're heading on to questions, do you have any response to having to deal with de-escalating a situation?
No, we're pretty lucky. We're not open to the public anymore. I work for a standalone law school. We're not attached to a university. We're a private school, so we're not typically open to the public. We used to be. Prior to the Harris County Law Library expanding their services, we were open to the public, and we used to have the 1st and 14th Court of Appeals housed in our building. They rented out a couple of our floors. And so we used to have quite a few patrons that would come in. There weren't very many hostile patrons usually when they were coming in. Most of them were fine. We did have a few people that had mental issues, and our policy for them was if they ask a question, we can't give them legal advice, but we can show them how to do research. And so they would come in and they'll have, want to sue the government because they were abducted by aliens. I'm not making that up. And so we basically would just say, well, okay, you're very nice, and you send them on their way. And as long as you give them some help, some way, they were usually fine. And our solution to that is, this is a federal jurisdiction. I'm going to sit you down with the index to the Federal Digest, and you can just find some court cases that will go along with that. But we don't have that problem anymore because we're not open to the public. Anna?
Yeah, I would just echo what Lacy and Heather say. I'm thinking about a variety of different hostile patron interactions, and two things come to mind. One is that the staff that typically interact are usually, always very nice. It's always key to put on a listening face. But one thing I will just add to the conversation is that the rude responses that you may get from the public when you've got somebody because you usually come into the situation ready to help, glad to help, and then the situation can devolve from there, and it can get very rude and uncomfortable, and it's surprising. It's unexpected. You're going through a normal day, and then a hostile interaction can happen. So one of the things we try to do is to talk to the staff after the situation is over. Just like Heather was saying, you usually give them something, and then they go on, or you have to end the conversation somehow. It's very jarring and it's hurtful, and it's worth having a conversation with the staff to say your feelings of anger or frustration or whatever they may be are very normal and real. And so to not gloss over what has happened to the staff member is also very helpful. That's all I would add.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do that with my staff too. After the hostile person is left, I usually pull them aside and tell them, you did everything you could for them. This is not on you. Here's $1. Go get yourself a candy bar on me. Take a walk. Go walk outside. Please come back. But you did your job. You did a great job, and I'm proud of you.
Thank you, Lacy, for following up on that. And thank you, Anna, for bringing in that human angle. And yeah, that touches on, we don't put something like that in a disaster plan, but since we do often practice our active shooter drills, maybe we also need to practice de-escalating those type of situations for those of us that are open to the public and deal with those types of situations, since libraries often are community centers and have, we're all things to all people. There was another question, a really great question. Somebody in the audience wanted to know if you would be willing to share your previous disaster plans and your updated disaster plan, and not something that necessarily was given to you by the university, but your own that you built in your library specifically.
I would have to say mine are open to the public. I mean, I personally wouldn't have a problem with it, but I would have to ask the court if it's public knowledge.
This is Lacy speaking.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Heather.
Of course, with permissions, yes.
Yeah, I have the same problem. I actually had to ask to get the most recent copy of the emergency operations plan because I hadn't seen it in a while and I couldn't find it. So I actually had to ask to get it. And I was told that it wasn't approved for release to the public as of yet. If I could find the old one, I could give you that. I don't know how useful that would be.
And this is Anna. It's the same. We'd have to get permissions.
Okay, thank you. And that's also important to know about, the fact that you had to ask to even see it. Why are we not, right when we get started, making that something that's available to our employees and, reviewing that regularly as a team, even just once a year, so that we're all aware of the disaster plan. But personally, before the pandemic even hit, I wasn't even 10 years into this field where the disaster plans were a thing. And that made me really wonder, what have I been doing this whole time? Because again, being proactive rather than reactive. So I should have been more aware of that as somebody in the working world. Well, we don't have any more questions. So thank you so much, Anna, Heather, and Lacy. That was fantastic. Really appreciate you all sharing with us your experiences. Especially, I loved the part about adding in the human aspect of, Anna, what you said about people had trauma before that they might be bringing into this. Somebody in the audience did share that it made them think about earthquake they had lived through in LA. And Heather, you're constantly having hurricanes in Houston. And Lacy, you said people are still working there that had been there for the shooting. And we hear about shootings all the time across the country. So adding in that human layer for your employees as well is crucial, since you don't know, even with how much training that you can have, how somebody will actually respond in the situation. So thank you, thank you, thank you, even with the best disaster plan. So that's it for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.